Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. The Salisbury couple had been married for more than 10 years. They met at a sporting event in Moscow. Both Adriana and Michael loved running. At first they did it for fun, but then they wanted to get not only pleasure, but also a reward. Therefore, even before they met, Adriana and Michael wanted the same thing: to win a running competition. They ran to the finish line at almost the same time. The man was only a couple seconds ahead of her, but decided to cede the prize to Adriana, as she was such a beautiful delight that he couldn't resist her to get the stranger's attention and get her number. He decided to give her the gold cup, and so began a romantic relationship between two strong and intelligent people. At first, Adriana and Michael's relationship resembled a roller coaster, then crazy passion, then cold meetings. But then a miracle happened, and they were able to find common ground, and their relationship turned into something beautiful. They learned what happy stability was, or so Adriana thought. Michael was unhappy with a lot of things about the relationship. However, he did not hurry to share his thoughts with his beloved, because he knew that it would lead to a scandal. The man was afraid that if he expressed his opinion, his wife would leave him. And she was the ideal for him. And Adriana was a tall and blue-eyed blonde with a lush bust, thin Italy, and pumped legs. They call them purses nowadays. And Michael was a skinny-eyed brunette. He looked much younger than his years. He was 35, and Alina was only 30. Harmony reigned in their relationship. For about 10 years, no serious quarrels, money sharing, and even jealousy. That is why Michael made an offer, and on their anniversary, the girl was very happy and responded with consent. But who would not agree to marry the person they love? The wedding they played lavishly. On the day of the wedding, Salisbury was practically the whole town. Everything changed at one moment when Adriana's legs suddenly started to hurt. It turned out that the girl had problems with her joints, and she was categorically not allowed to do sports, but she neglected it. As a result, and the line was to undergo a long and expensive treatment, to walk again without pain. The girl really hoped that her husband would support her during the illness, but Michael did not care. He constantly wanted a physical manifestation of love, and Adriana could not give it to him because she was ill. At first, the man wanted to divorce immediately, but then changed his mind. His wife had too many advantages, and he didn't want to share the business in the divorce. Michael hired the best doctors for his wife, but she only got worse. From time to time, the man thought about a mistress, but he was stopped by the thought that he could get some kind of infection. Venereal disease, or worse, he would have to pay for sex with a woman, and he didn't like hiding, ciphering, and deceiving others. So Michael decided to get back into sports. At first it helped him. His whole head was filled with useful exercises. He learned to run faster and began to prepare for the next competition. But after a month, the man began to be annoyed by domestic issues. His wife stopped not only sleeping with him, but also cleaning, and a little later forgot about cooking. Michael did not want to go into direct conflict with Adriana, so he began to look for a maid, who for an additional fee will also cook. The businessman could not live long without a home-cooked meal. At first, the man entrusted the search for a maid to his wife, but noticing what candidate she selects, he decided to do the search himself. At first, only elderly women, students, and inexperienced ladies with children came to his interview. But when the man specifically emphasized the age, things went much better in the questionnaire. In a week, the man managed to look through more than 200 questionnaires and stopped at 3. The first girl could do everything in the kitchen, but she could not cope with cleaning the house. The second candidate lied about her age and was not even 18. And the third girl was perfect. Tall, brown eyes, brunette named Betty, impressed the man not only with her references, but also stunningly outfits for cleaning. Michael immediately made the decision to hire a third candidate for the job. The businessman did not listen to the protest of his beloved. He brazenly stated that he had to hire additional staff because of her illness, not because of his own whim. Perhaps the businessman's choice was influenced by his emotional and physical hunger. When you have a gorgeous woman in front of you, and she is ready to fulfill all your whims, you begin to succumb to her charms willy-nilly. At first, Betty only cleaned and cooked. Michael didn't respond to her flirting, but the outfits became more and more seductive and spectacular. And Adriana occasionally joked that the maid is a little over the top and confuses work with a modeling agency. But the woman's illness began to progress, so she had no time to keep an eye on the new employee. Betty did not immediately like Michael. He looked quite decent. He wore an expensive watch on his hand. His body was dressed in a luxurious suit of blue color. The girl grew up in a poor family, and she always wanted to meet a rich man, but she had never met such a man on her way. Perhaps the problem was that the girl was always lost at work, and there was no time to go to expensive restaurants. And she never saw successful men in ordinary cafes. Initially, Betty was a very purposeful girl, but already closer to 30 and just bored with work. However, the girl evaluated herself and did not want to become an escort. Betty found a different way out. She decided to go elite maid. This job not only brings a lot of money, but also expands the circle of acquaintances. It is by working as a maid, you can meet a rich man in Moscow. After Betty got a job at the agency, she had already had 2 relationships with folders, but they were deeply married and were not going to change anything in their lives. So despite her love for money, Betty was running away from her rich suitors. At the first opportunity, she already wanted to become the wife of a rich businessman herself. Therefore, the girl changed employers every month. However, after 3 months, Betty was tired of running from one house to another, and her last hope was for a new order in the center of Moscow. But the owner of the house, named Michael, as it turned out, was also married. When Betty learned that her next customer was married, she decided to forget about her dream and began to fulfill her work duties in the hope of saving up for a car. The month was drawing to a close. The girl wanted to get a raise on top of her basic paycheck, and in order not to ask directly from Betty, used a proven method. She began to experiment with dishes, serving on the table only the delights of the kitchen, and the housemaid tried to wipe the house to a shine. It was with this that she won Michael over. Of course, he noticed how hard his new employee was trying and literally gave her $100,000 in cash. However, when the man learned that Betty was not going to stay for another month, he was very upset and began to think about how to dissuade her from changing employers. Nothing interesting came to mind, so Michael called his business partner, and if she is as wonderful in intimacy as she is in the kitchen, then I will definitely use all her services, Michael said on the phone to his friend Alfred from Sweden. His business partner and comrade responded to his ironic statement as follows: "Why do you need all this? Be patient for another month. Maybe your wife will soon get back on her feet. She is insanely beautiful. If you want to cheat on her, maybe you should get a divorce. Don't torture Adriana." Michael frowned and whispered angrily into the phone, "Are you even on my side or not? You know how long it took me to eat properly before Betty showed up. And I'm not talking about marital duty. And Adriana is just my eternal must." There was laughter on the other line. And after a brief argument, Michael and Alfred decided to change the subject. After all, they are about to sign another contract. It was Betty's last day at work at Michael's. She cooked a sumptuous dinner, laid out the dishes, poured the wine, and later cleaned up. She loved working in this house. It was rarely dirty. The man was clearly picking on his wife. He bore in line of brain for an hour from a single napkin lying on the table. Thank God I'm a maid and not his wife, Betty thought. The girl's musings were interrupted by Michael, who ran into the house and began quickly gathering some papers into a pile and taking pictures. The maid looked at the man excitedly and asked what's wrong. The businessman first brushed her off and then replied that his wife would soon go to Germany for treatment. Doctors at one of the hospitals promised quick results. In 2 weeks, Adriana would be healthy again, just like before. Betty's eyes lit up. Was this really the chance to get a rich husband or not? Though why would she need such a tedious spouse? After a short deliberation, the girl decided to leave the house and asked for the maid's last paycheck. I wanted to do the right thing and not to break someone else's family. But as soon as the girl tried to open her mouth and ask for payment for services, Sergei jumped up from behind his desk and ran to his office. Betty did not. Curious as to why the man had taken off so abruptly, she went to the door of his office. At first, some shouting and swearing could be heard, and then the man blurted out that he was so nervous about his lack of marital duty and hung up the phone. At that moment, Betty realized that she had to stay in this house for at least 2 weeks. Michael may be the one who is her chance for a happy and trouble-free life. When the man came out of the study, Betty had already managed to step away from the door and make an innocent appearance. The girl started a conversation with Michael about payment and at the same time complained about the problems with his office, asking to work another 14 days in his house. The man agreed, but asked the maid to stay out of his way during the negotiations and to keep out of sight. Betty was surprised that Michael reacted so coldly and angrily to her request, but decided to go through with it. For the first few days, Michael was hardly ever at home. The man celebrated his wife's departure and her future recovery. Michael had already changed his mind about cheating on his wife, but he was drawn to Betty like a magnet. After Michael hired a maid in his house, he began to have constant erotic dreams, in which Betty was always present in his dreams. The girl was always only in black lingerie and would kneel before him, begging him not to punish her for the broken vase. It was because of sexual hunger and frightening dreams that the man decided to go on a bender with his friends. He did everything he could to avoid seeing the insanely sexy brunette in front of him again, but he didn't want to fire her. Michael was afraid that he could at any moment lose control of himself and cross the line in their relationship, and this would not only destroy their marriage with Adriana, but also force him to show his true colors. Returning after another party, the man had a snack and went to shower, forgetting that he had a maid working in the house. A hangover sometimes knocks a person out of balance, making him forget about everything while Michael washed off his fatigue and the unpleasant odor of alcohol. Someone was already taking over his house. As soon as the man tried to get out of the shower stall, he heard a heartbreaking scream that was clearly coming from the pantry. The man turned off the water, threw a towel over himself, and rushed toward the room from which the noise was coming. Betty stationed herself in one of the rooms. I don't think Michael will be coming today. Everything went well at first. The girl undressed, and it was left to her to put on top of herself the official uniform of the company. But suddenly, the maid staggered back and leaned against the window. And then a pot of sand fell on her. Her first reaction to the falling pot was to scream. She spent mad money on one of the best molds in Moscow. It was hardly washable. The material was very delicate. The uniform cost as much as 3 of her shifts. That's why after the yelling, the swear words came out. The girl would have kept on yelling if the storeroom door had not suddenly opened. In front of her stood her employer named Michael, wrapped in a single towel. The man's hair was as wet as his entire body. It was on the cake that the most water droplets had accumulated. At first, Betty felt a slight wave of arousal at seeing a naked Michael, but then she lowered her eyes down. The girl felt ashamed of the situation. First the screaming, and now she was standing in her underwear near the broken pot. The situation couldn't get any worse. Opening the door, the young businessman expected to see anything but a sexual fantasy come to life in front of his nose. Michael made a remark to Betty about the mess and hurriedly retreated so the maid wouldn't notice his arousal. Sexual hunger was taking a very negative toll on the man's body. As he left the pantry, the man was angry with himself, for he wanted so badly to cheat on his wife right now. His body's desires were stronger than his mind. He felt like he was losing control and knew how this could turn out for everyone. When the potty incident was over, the work at the maid's office went on as usual until the evening. Already close to 20:00, the girl decided to come to Michael's office for payment. But as soon as she came to the office door, she suddenly wanted to play with the boss. The maid noticed in the morning that the man got excited when he saw her in her underwear, and she wanted to know how much he was attracted to her. Because of her ruined shape, the girl had to work all day in a red dress, but it was quite long. So Betty decided to make it a little shorter since the girl was studying to be a designer. Changing the length of her cape was not difficult for her. The cut, made with simple scissors, turned out to be quite beautiful. Walking into Michael's office after knocking, the girl asked for payment and then pretended to drop her brooch. Next, Betty erotically bent over and began to look for it. The man noticed that the maid's dress had definitely gotten shorter, but thought he was just imagining it. However, when Betty bent over, his heart began to tap away, and this time his patience broke. Michael approached Betty from behind and slowly slid his hand around her waist, starting to move lower, and then pulled the girl to him. The maid sighed loudly as she rose from her knees, removed the man's hands, and turned around to face him. It seemed as if Betty was about to slap Michael, for she was drilling him with her gaze. However, the girl suddenly drew him to her and drew him into a passionate kiss. With slow defections, the couple reached the bed. The businessman unbuttoned and removed Betty's dress in a couple of minutes and then threw it away. The maid, on the other hand, tried to delay the undressing process. She took off his jacket, then stretched his shirt for a long time, paying attention to every button. Already after 15 minutes, the couple had completely undressed and began to have fun on the bed. Michael was not on sitting, and Betty. Already after 2 o'clock, she asked him to stop. But suddenly, the man grabbed the girl by the throat and began to choke Betty, looking around and did not know what to do. The maid started to just gasp on the bed, and soon she just passed out. After coming to her senses, Betty looked around the room and noticed that Michael was no longer here, but there was breakfast on a tray and a note on the bed nearby. Betty was trembling with fear. It seemed to her that her boss was about to burst into the room and finish what he had started. Half an hour later, when the panic attack subsided and it was clear to the girl that no one was home, she quickly dressed and opened the note that was lying on the bed. It said the following: "Sorry, for last night everything was super on your part, but I don't know how to contain my emotions. I have aggression issues, but I'm working on myself. It won't happen again. I promise. I hope you don't go to the police, because my lawyers will deal with you pretty quickly. Kisses, Michael." After reading the note, the girl began to have mixed feelings. Her mind was screaming that she was looking at a psychopath, but her heart wanted to believe that it was just an unfortunate mistake. After all, a long abstinence and stress could well provoke such behavior in a man. The girl decided to continue the relationship with Sergey and tried no longer to provoke him to emotions even in terms of sex. Therefore, she removed all vulgar outfits from her closet. All 2 weeks, the couple practically did not get out of bed, and if they got out, only to change the place of rest. Betty even made it to Michael's workplace, but the lovers' happiness didn't last long. When before the arrival of Adriana was only 1 day, the truly beastly gut Michael again came out. The man asked the maid to come early to discuss the terms of her stay on the job. After all, Betty had only asked for 14 days, and they were almost over. The girl, naturally, asked the man to extend the contract for another month. Michael almost immediately agreed, but after signing the contract, he suddenly hesitated and said, "You can stay. But there is one thing." The maid proceeded and interrupted Michael, and then said, "If you're about your wife, then don't worry. I'm not going to tell her about our affair." Suddenly, the man's eyes warmed with anger. Betty, it didn't seem as if Michael was about to explode like a time bomb. But he pulled himself together and quietly continued his monologue. "No, that's not what I mean. If we're going to continue sleeping together, you need to know what I want. I don't want just sex. I want more violence, use handcuffs, belts, and more." At first, the maid was amused, but then she decided to clarify something. "What do you mean by a lot of other things? Not strangulation, I hope." The man smiled falsely and said, "No, of course not." Betty, but was confused by Michael's answer. So she quickly picked up the money from the table and turned toward the door to make a quick exit. She practically reached for the handle when she suddenly felt someone holding her hair. After a couple seconds, the man dragged the girl to the back of the office, entered a strange combination on the safe, and a door opened in the wall. Michael then threw the girl to the floor. The hidden room went in himself and closed the door behind him. The hidden room was illuminated by dim flashlights, so it was impossible to see the surroundings. Although Betty resisted with all her might, Michael was stronger and did not let her break free. Once in the secret room, the maid didn't know how to fight off the man or where to run. She had already regretted 100 times that she had stayed in this house and decided to have an affair with her boss. Betty was beginning to realize that she was willing to do anything to survive, and if need be, she would kill the man in self-defense. Michael dragged the maid to the bed and lay down next to her. Tearing his clothes off, he tried to strangle her but was interrupted by a phone call. This time there were ghastly red marks on Betty's skin, and the girl felt that something was wrong with her neck. The girl suddenly realized that if she could escape now, Michael could easily be put behind bars. The injuries she had sustained should have been enough to file a police report. While the man was talking to his wife and Lena on the phone, the maid had time not only to assess her injuries, but also to think over a plan of escape. She saw a metal alarm clock near the bed and managed to grab it in her hand. As soon as Michael turned towards her, Betty hit the man with the alarm clock on the head after hitting and splitting his eyebrow. The businessman instantly lost consciousness. The girl checked her tormentor's pulse and made sure he was alive. She began to realize the plan to escape. Grabbing the phone, the maid stepped over the body of Michael, who half cut off the bed, and ran towards the door with the code. Checking the latest notes on her iPhone, the girl saw a strange combination of numbers. Then she used the code she saw to lock the system, and the door opened. It was through ingenuity and luck that the girl was able to escape. When Betty reached home, she immediately called the police, giving a statement to the interrogation. The girl hoped for the integrity of the police officers and did not alarm the media. But a week later, she got a call saying that the case was closed. Allegedly, someone saw how the girl had injured herself and blamed Michael for everything. It was clear that the businessman had bribed witnesses, but it was good if he cooled off afterwards. And what if he didn't? At first, Betty tried to forget about the boss assault incident, but her office was a constant reminder of all her past employers. Some clients don't want maids to work with. That's why apps are constantly advertising non-liquid employers. The blacklist of maids also included Michael, which is not surprising. And it's not as if Michael was just an app. After the strangulation, the girl began to notice that her neck ached incessantly and a terrible cough appeared. Betty decided to take a break from work and went to the hospital hoping to forget about the past. The doctor, after examination and tests, told the girl that she had displaced vertebrae in her neck, and to be fully rehabilitated, a lot of money must be spent. Betty, she was at a dead end. After all, she had just recently paid off most of her savings for a new apartment. It was the last mortgage bill. The maid made the decision to once again go to the authorities and sue Michael. She realized that if she won her case, her medical treatment would be paid for, so the man could not pay off again. Betty decided to find Michael's other victims and take statements from them. The maid was certain that she was far from the first girl Michael had attacked. Betty first of all decided to complain to the wife of the cheater, as she was sure that she must know more about him than the others. Adriana had only recently returned from Germany, but she was already glowing from the inside like a sunshine. Her legs were no longer sore, and she could even run on the treadmill. When she returned home, however, she was saddened by the fact that her husband did not greet her immediately. It was after a brief interaction with her spouse. It seemed to her that it was physically impossible for him to say hello. Her hunch was confirmed when she saw that on the back of Michael's head painted a bloody cut. Toward evening, Adriana decided to talk to her husband again after discussing his treatment in Germany. The girl decided to broach the subject of the incident in the house and started the conversation with the following questions. Honey, what happened to your head? Did you at least treat the wound? Why is the house such a mess? The maid was supposed to stay for another month. Michael made a cute face and quietly replied to his wife, "It's okay, just playing soccer with the guys. And Lekka hit me in the head with a ball. I'll soon go to the hospital and work there." And the maid turned out to be a piece of crap. I think you were right about her inappropriate behavior and begging for tips all the time. I'll send her away once and for all. Adriana was very surprised at her husband's reaction to the maid, for she thought he liked Betty very much. After all, he'd done all the candidates for her alone. But the wife was tired of wandering around hospitals and dealing with domestic issues, so she decided to take care of her beloved and said, "Come here, I will treat your wound, and then together we will go to the hospital and make you an X-ray." The man breathed a sigh of relief and smiled sadly. When his wife came to him, he immediately embraced her and said, "You've come at last." When the couple returned from the hospital, it turned out that the man had a concussion. She carefully put her husband to sleep and forbade him to work for the next week, while she herself reflected on the doctor's words. The doctor claimed that a sword wouldn't have left such a deep wound. It was clearly something sharp and metallic. The businessman's wife began to ponder why the man she loved had harmed her. But suddenly it occurred to her that Michael might have gotten into a bar fight and covered it up so she wouldn't worry. But Adriana's illusions about her husband's decency were dispelled an hour later. She received a call from Betty's maid and asked to meet at the cafe to discuss some terrible incident. And her main condition was to come without her husband and not to tell him anything. At first, Adriana wanted to wake up her husband and ask him what was wrong. But her intuition told her that first she should go to the cafe and discuss everything with Betty. That way, she could get to the truth. Opening her spouse with a blanket, the woman put on her favorite gray business suit and heels, then promptly advanced toward the cafe. When Adriana approached the coffee shop and went inside, the maid was already there. She immediately waved to Michael's spouse to get her attention. As she approached the table, Adriana noticed that the maid's neck was practically all blue, as were her arms. She felt uncomfortable, so she sat down on the nearest table and started asking the former employee questions from the get-go. "Why did you call me and ask me not to say anything to my husband? What good would that do you?" Betty smirked sadly and began his story. Adriana listened to her for about an hour, and she felt uncomfortable with the maid's story. She was desperate to justify her husband, so she asked another question, "And why should I believe you and not my spouse?" Betty skimmed her eyebrows and instantly replied, "Why not? Didn't he have something like this in his past? Think back, strain your memory." After the maid's words, and Adriana sank into her memories, Michael, in the first year of acquaintance, told her one terrible secret. During a vacation by the sea, the man told his beloved that in the past he had terrible outbursts of aggression. He strangled all his former women. And once as a student, he grabbed a prostitute so hard by the neck that she almost died, and then disappeared. No one could ever find her. When Adriana was able to get out of the memories, she decided to tell the maid the truth, not suspecting that the girl would want to put her husband in jail and take most of his money. And Adriana was so much worried about Betty's story that she decided to leave the cafe and be alone. The wife began to think about divorce. Of course, she loves Michael, but he's just been acting so disgusting for the last year, and the cheating and strangling story is just too much. Even though Adriana came from a wealthy family, she was scared to divorce Michael, especially after the abuse. She secretly called a lawyer and decided to gather all the documents as well as her belongings. And Adriana went to extreme measures so that it was possible to escape from her husband's lair without negative consequences. The maid, on the other hand, had recovered from the shock and acted rationally. She memorized the surname, first name, patronymic of a former girlfriend, Michael, and found her in social networks, and then arranged a meeting. as she did when she went to beauty salons on the internet. It was not difficult to pay for one trip to the masseur. All the more the girl realized that her efforts would pay off in a few hours. Betty and Kathy were already lying on the massage table. Near the end of the treatment, the maid spoke, and Michael's ex was shocked. After hearing the story to the end, Kathy decided to support the girl and help her by talking about her past and Michael. Back in college, when Michael was quite frail but insanely polite, Kathy fell in love with him. She had Caucasian and Russian roots at the same time, so her upbringing was very strict. She looked for a man according to certain criteria. Kathy tried to find a faithful, intelligent, and wealthy. And when she found one, she was overjoyed. Even as a student, Michael could throw money around. After all, his parents provided him with everything. At first, everything was fine in Kathy and Michael's relationship, but one day he quarreled with the teacher and he failed him, and then sent him for retesting. That was a day Kathy would never forget. At first, the girl thought it was strange that the man smiled at her fake smiles. Then he laughed at her sad stories, and at the funny ones he almost cried that day. And towards evening, he simply attacked from behind and began to strangle Kathy. Then, very much frightened and barely broke free. What scared the girl the most was that when Michael let go of her neck, he looked indifferent and empty. It was like if I died, he wouldn't care. Betty finished her story, puzzled by the girl's inaction, and asked, "Why didn't you go to the police?" Adriana sighed sadly and answered, "I was afraid of the judgment of society. I wasn't supposed to date a Russian. And then this happened. My father would have killed him." Betty tried to digest the information and continued, "Did you hear about the missing prostitute, Kathy?" She nodded and answered, "Yes, I had, but I was sure before you told me that it was just rumor and speculation. Now I don't know what to believe. There was a girl at our university, so to speak, of easy behavior. Not that she worked unofficially, more for fun. She helped our guys get rid of their fears and perverted fantasies. So in her 20s, she'd had a taste of everything. It would have gone on like that if she hadn't met Michael. One day at a student party, everyone gathered and celebrated Russia Day in the dormitory. Then Michael got alone with this Christina, and the next morning she was found unconscious. Her whole neck was bruised and cut. The guys ran to call an ambulance and the police on the street, because in the dormitory at that time the connection was bad. Or maybe there were some plugs. Having called the relevant services, the guys returned with a calm soul, but her body was missing. Whether she's alive or dead is still unknown. Many were convinced that Christina simply woke up and ran away. Allegedly, she was ashamed. Betty was horrified to hear the story and could only squeeze the following out of herself. "It's brutal. Do you know the girl's parents? Friends? I really need to find witnesses for a rape case. He's bribing the police. If I don't find Christina, you can come forward." Adriana nodded and whispered, "Yes, I'll help you. But it's important that my identity is not revealed until after the trial." A few weeks passed. The maid had already tracked down a few witnesses, but she wasn't sure of their reliability. But all the stories of the girls she'd interviewed pointed to one Michael as a maniac. It was only a matter of time before he snapped and escalated his aggression. And in 3 weeks, she managed to pack up all her belongings and documents and smuggle them out to a new home. She was lucky when her father found out what kind of monster lived with her daughter, immediately started looking for a new place to live and found it, and then bought it for his daughter, formalizing it for himself. The woman decided to announce the divorce over the phone. But fear and excitement before the conversation did not go anywhere. Calling Michael at work, she began the dialogue. "First of all, hello. We need to have a serious talk with you." The man was surprised by the serious tone of his wife, but did not pay much attention to it. All because after the girl came back from the hospital and her behavior was quite strange, it felt like she was just avoiding him. Since Michael was busy at work, he replied like this, "Hello, my love. What's wrong with you? You're sick again." The girl rolled her eyes as she sat on the new bed in her house and irritably continued, "No, I'm not sick. You see, I don't want to be with you anymore. I think we should get a divorce." Suddenly, laughter was heard on the line. Michael thought Adriana was joking. Their marriage was perfect. If it wasn't for the girl's illness, there would be no problems at all. Therefore, he issued the following text after catching his breath. "Today, what's April 1? Nice prank, but let's get down to business. I'll come to work to get dinner on the table. By the way," and Adriana was dumbfounded by the insolence of her husband, but realized that it was a defensive reaction. That's why she replied like this: "My dear husband, I filed for divorce today. I'm not kidding. And this is no joke. I hope that you will be able to let me go quietly and without scandal." Suddenly, the man was seized by rage, and he abruptly threw a few phrases into the tube. "Then your things will be in the garbage tonight. No more scandals. You won't get a dime from me." Adriana surprisingly did not react to the threat and continued, "I have already taken my things and documents. Bye." After these words, the girl disconnected and put the phone away. Michael was furious. After one time, he was so seized by emotions that he decided to take revenge. First of all, he aimed at the secretary and decided for himself that tonight he would have a stormy night. And after that, he will take care of his already ex-wife. Inviting the secretary Anna home for a cup of tea, he took advantage of her trust in him and slipped her Aphrodite. So even before the action of the means, the girl began to flirt with the man and pulled into bed. After a stormy night, the businessman still could not calm down. After all, he was abandoned by 2 girls in a month. Thinking a little, Michael realized why his wife had run away so abruptly. His eyes were gushing blood. He grabbed the sleeping woman and started strangling her in his head. The picture loomed as he strangled the maid, and she died. Anna suddenly opened her eyes. Her neck ached, and she was desperately short of breath. She tried to push the man away, but she couldn't succeed. It seemed to her that this was the end. At this point, Betty had already filed a police report with the rest of the victims. A few days later, the report was accepted and an investigation began. The criminal case was influenced not only by the testimonies of several girls, but also by the disappearance of Michael's secretary. After the employee spent the night with her boss, she was never seen again. Her parents filed a missing persons report because she was going to visit her supervisor, but never returned home. Betty rejoiced and cheered. After all, the victory and the cherished money were very close. However, it seemed strange to her that the man always controlled himself and then took and killed a girl who worked in his firm. It was not logical or prudent for a successful businessman, but her heart this time said it was possible. The fact is that he is just a psychopath and does not know how to control emotions. While the former maid was pondering Michael's motives, he was sitting in an interrogation and proving his innocence. "I don't deny that I overdid it with Kathy when I was a student, but she forgave me. And the maid put an alarm clock to my head harder than I choked her. I even have a certificate, and the other exes here have testified to revenge violence. Yeah, I love those S&M showers, but I warned a lot of people about this beforehand. As for Anna, I didn't kill her. I'm not stupid enough to take a fall at work. Everyone knew she was coming with me. Why would I do something like that?" Justified Michael. The investigator looked at the man carefully and continued asking questions. "Who told you that the girl was killed?" "She was just put on the wanted list. But for the attempted strangulation of other women, you will have to answer one way or another. It's either jail or probation with restitution. A lot depends on your lawyer and your sanity." The man put his hand to his forehead, wiped his face, and quietly answered the police officer. Yeah, I got it. I'll reimburse them for all the damages. I'll give them the money. I'm not going to run from responsibility, but you need to let me go. I got a lot of work to do. I have to pay them back somehow." The investigator tapped the papers on the table irritably and threw a few sentences. "We'll let you out in 2400 hours, but until then, you stay here. If we don't find anything in your house, we'll let you go. As soon as the investigator came out of the interview, Michael mimicked the police officer by repeating his last line and grimaced. The investigator was sure that Michael was not involved in Anna's kidnapping and possible murder. But all the evidence and testimonies do not work in his favor, especially since in the past one of his acquaintances had already disappeared, and after that 2 more girls with whom he secretly almost cheated on his wife, but did not have time. About the latter knew only the employees of the department. Conducted a search in the house of Michael, did not give anything to the investigation, so the man was released on his own recognizance. Pending the outcome of the investigation, everything was quiet and calm until the trial. Before the start of the trial, Michael caught up with Betty and the victims to say the following. I realize that I have done wrong in the past. I regret that I tried to hurt you and that I did not get treatment for my outbursts of uncontrolled aggression. I signed up for therapy. I'm trying to change. You don't have to ruin my life. I'll pay whatever it takes. I don't want to go to jail for a murder I didn't commit. His eyes filled with tears. Looking at Michael, the victims began to doubt that he was involved in Anna's kidnapping, but not Betty. The girl had mentally made up her mind. For her, Michael was guilty, and that was it. Betty looked at the businessman and answered for everyone. I don't know how I can let you go after all you've done. At first I only wanted money, and now I dream of putting you away. Your secretary is missing, and I can't trust you anymore. Maybe I'll take the case to its logical conclusion, and you'll finally go to jail. During the trial, Adriana walked down a winding road, wearing a black suit and falcon heels. After making a couple of laps, the girl walked down a garage cooperative in the woods. Going inside one of the garages and closing, Adriana took out some plates and mugs. She filled the plates with food and the crumbs with water. Then she stepped back, opened the basement, and turned on the lights, put the dishes on the tray, grabbed it, and began to slowly make her way downstairs. As the girl slowly made her way down the stairs, not only could you hear the unpleasant consciousness, but also the mooing of the women sitting on the chains that were in the room. Fully descended, and Adriana looked around at her nieces and laughed, saying, "Time eat up, darlings. I'm sure you've already made friends with the new girl. Her name is Anna. She was Michael's secretary, and she really enjoyed sleeping with him." After feeding, Adriana was about to gag the last one, but she wouldn't let her. At first she just asked for help in screaming, and then she became attracted with Michael's spouse. You're a sick psychopath. You realize Michael doesn't need you. Why you're kidnapping women? Why do you keep me here? I don't give a shit about your husband. I was only trying to warn you. I slept with him before you two even officially met. And she looked at Christina carefully and spelled out every word and phrase. Listen to me carefully. When I first started dating Michael, you came running to me with pity stories about him being the strangler. I told you I wasn't interested, but you wanted support. You started urging me to file a complaint against your beloved husband. After all, you poor thing, you had to hide from him for months like you were afraid to. And I didn't care if you were the one coming on to me. Michael was mine. And I liked him before I met him. I saw him at university and I loved him at first sight. And you made him dirty, you ruined him. I had to put up with so much because you don't know anything about love. He loves me. He hasn't even strangled me once. That proves the fact that I'm the love of his life. And you guys are just doormats. I was sure I wouldn't forgive cheating. So I protected our marriage many times from this. But in the case of Betty, I failed. Unfortunately, I can't bring her here yet. But someday her corpse will be lying here. And if she misbehaves, I'm sure that if I can tell my beloved husband the truth about myself, and he confesses to me about the cheating and strangling, our marriage can be saved. Christina grimaced at the words, and Lena, beginning to realize that in front of her is a psychopath that cannot be cured, and spat back, yes, you're the perfect couple. I can't argue with that. Strangler and face snatcher. Adriana smiled wickedly and added, wait, it's not over yet. Our new girl, Anna, may have to be killed. After these words, Michael's wife taped Christina's mouth with duct tape and climbed the stairs upstairs. The girls won the trial, but Michael's lawyer didn't waste any time either and got him a suspended sentence. The businessman exhaled and calmed down as he left the courtroom. But then Betty flew up to him again and started talking. "You're not getting away from me that easy. You have to answer for killing that girl. You're a maniac." The man became sad again and answered, "I'm not a maniac. Do you understand or not? I'm going to the clinic, and I don't care if you believe it or not. Move aside and let me pass already." The girl blocked the man's way and continued, "No, I'll go to the media. No one will want to work with a maniac. Everyone will find out, and even your wife." Michael felt anger rising to his heart. He wanted to wring the girl's neck, but he pulled himself together and said, "Listen to me carefully. You're a fool. Buy if I want. It is you no one and nowhere will not take. And about my wife, she is no longer my wife. And it's all thanks to you. I've already realized that you're the one who told her, all kinds of nonsense." She filed for divorce. Betty calmed down and shut up. Realizing that it was useless to prove anything to the former teacher, the girl decided to take revenge silently. So she turned around and left. A few weeks later, Betty went to the media and told the horrible story of how the maniac was released because of insufficient evidence. After that, the Maid even went on various shows. On each of them, she described in color what it was like to work in the house of a maniac. Michael began to have problems at work. A lot of people started canceling contracts with him. People really believed that the businessman was a maniac who could buy his way out of jail. The man ordered disproving articles and then also began to star in the show. But it didn't help. He was recognized on the street and thought to be a murderer because of the media's delusional articles. Anna's parents also kept up with him and continued to sue him. After all that happened, Adriana realized that it was time to return to her husband and support him. After all, he has already answered for his treason. It remains to tell him his secret, and their love will blossom again as before. Before going to her husband, the girl again visited her nieces and this time decided to have a longer conversation, not with Christina, but with Anna, who worked at Michael's secretary. After Anuta felt that her mouth was no longer covered by Scotch tape, she rejoiced and tried to take a full breath. Then, with pleading eyes, she looked at Adriana and asked to be let home. She promised to disappear and not tell anyone anything. Anna only asked for one thing: to let her escape. Adriana smirked imperceptibly and replied to the secretary, "I am not angry with you as I am with Christina, but you slept with my husband. Therefore, you must answer for your deed. However, there is a good chance that you are the one I will let go. But before I do, I want to ask you a few questions. Sweet Anna, how good is my husband in bed? Why did he decide to sleep with you?" Asking the second question, Adriana took a knife out of her back pocket and ran the tip of it across the girl's face. Anna was horrified, but she said, "I don't know. That unfortunate day you called him and said something. I have no idea about the intimacy. I think he was more concerned about strangulation." After Anna and Adriana's words, things calmed down considerably. Then Michael's wife said the following: "That's right. I'm the one who announced the divorce. Yes, unfortunately, you were a victim of circumstance. I'll let you go soon, don't worry." Right after confessing my secret to my husband, suddenly Adriana started ripping the duct tape off each girl's lips and declared that she had made such an isolation that they could now scream forever and no one would hear them. After a few minutes, Michael's wife left food and drinks for the captives and then left altogether. But this time, she decided not to turn off the lights in the room, as she realized that it was quite likely that one of them would soon die of exhaustion. Leaving the garage and getting to her car, Adriana got behind the wheel and pulled out her phone, dialing her husband's number. She started the first conversation. "Hi, Michael. I need to have a serious talk with you again. I've missed you, and there is one thing we should discuss in private. Michael was very surprised to receive a call from his almost ex-wife, so he picked up the phone without delay. And after hearing this, he said, "Of course, Adriana, I'll be glad to see you. Soon we will be divorced, but I missed you too. If anything, I drink cognac at home. Come on over." Then the man passed out and continued watching the horror movie, drinking alcohol. Adriana found herself outside his house. After an hour she knocked, and when no one opened, Adriana just used an old key and went in. Passing into the hall, the girl noticed that her husband was asleep. A bottle of cognac is standing next to him, and a horror movie is on the laptop. Adriana smiled sadly. Once upon a time, they used to watch movies together and fall asleep on this bed. They used to be the perfect couple. The girl cleaned the room and then walked over to her sleeping husband and covered him with the blanket again. After a little thinking, Adriana undressed, threw on her old robe, which was left in the closet, and lay down next to Michael, and then also fell into sleep. Michael woke up to a foul odor. Was it just him, or was someone cooking his favorite pie in the kitchen? Looking around, Michael noticed that the hall was cleaned up and his laptop was turned off. Suddenly, the man dropped a single word, "Adriana," into the void. His wife came into the room and replied, "Yes, darling, I am here. I know you need support right now." The girl further held out a pie to her husband, sat down next to him, and gently rubbed his head. Michael was very happy that his wife was home again. Everything was fine. As before, he was afraid to scare Adriana away, because everyone had stopped talking to him after the shocking news on TV. So he whispered thank you. After the parade dined first, Adriana spoke. "I didn't come just to make you a pie. We really need to talk." Michael didn't realize what else his wife could say to him, so he answered her, "What exactly do you want to talk about?" "Adriana," he smirked and continued, "I know you didn't kidnap anyone just because I did." The man choked on the water he was drinking. And then Michael looked at Adriana with surprised eyes and said, "It's a strange joke." Suddenly, Adriana grabbed his face with her fingers. She stroked her chin and in a serious tone said, "I've ever made a joke in the last 10 years of my relationship with you. I'm not joking. At first, the victim was a college girl who everyone thought was a prostitute. When we started dating, she wanted to report you. I only did it to protect your reputation. Then I came across 2 others. Is that how you looked at them? It was obvious you might have cheated on me, and I saved our marriage. But the Anna situation was as much about revenge as filing for divorce. I think you need to come clean about some of the things you've done. Then we can rebuild our relationship, and everything would be just like it was before." Michael felt the ground swim away from under his feet after Adriana's revelation. His head was spinning, and he felt as if he were about to faint. Despite the fainting, the man replied to his wife, "My God, why did you do that? At least they're alive. Where are you keeping them?" Before Adriana could hear the answer, the man felt weakness in his body and fell back into bed. When he woke up, a few hours later, the man noticed that he was tied to his bed. The businessman also noted that he was wearing only his underwear. He just wanted to scream help, but suddenly, the music came on, and Adriana entered the room. In one hand, she held a knife, and in the other, a glass with cognac. She quickly listened to the glass and put it aside on the nightstand, and then climbed on the bed and sat on top of her husband. Michael was shocked, and for a second, he even thought he was paralyzed with fear. Strangely enough, there was no aggression towards his wife, perhaps because of the treatment in the clinic, or maybe from shock. The man, coming out of his thoughts, noticed that the girl was wearing a leather suit. Realizing that something wrong was going on, Michael tried to get through to his wife's mind. "Honey, I don't know what the women you kidnapped told you, but that's not what I wanted. I realize I've made a lot of mistakes in my marriage, but you can't kill me. Please just let me go." Adriana laughed and replied, "Stop it. Why kill me? They didn't kill you and I didn't kill you. I love you, darling, and I want you to tell me all your secrets. as a young girl suddenly took out a knife and began to run it down Michael's throat. Then she continued, "Well, tell me how you strangled them. Why did you do it? We need to save the marriage before it's too late." The man realized that his wife had just lost her mind. But how long it had been going on was unclear. Had he been dating a crazy woman all these years and then married her? Michael was determined that he needed to find out where the girls were in order to save them and his reputation. So he said, "I choked them out of aggression. All that recycling and a lot of alcohol. I'm cured now. You better tell me why you don't let those girls go where you keep them." After Adriana heard her husband's questions, she realized that this marriage could not be saved. So she lightly scratched her husband's neck with a knife and whispered the following in his ear. "Lenina, 12, Building 3, Garage 17. But I'll have to get rid of you too, just like them. But not today." Suddenly, Adriana got off her husband and untied him, and then slowly and quietly left the house. Michael did not dare to run after her and called the police, immediately telling the horror story about his wife and the kidnapped women. Initially, the man was not believed, but was obliged to check the garage. Police officers drove to the address, but when the garage door was opened to the operatives, it became clear that there were no kidnapped women. Michael was issued a ticket for false summons and asked to go to a psychiatric hospital, and Adriana was not surprised that the man tried to turn her into the police. But she was hurt that he did not even think about her words and immediately began to call the authorities. To kill Michael, the girl did not want to kill Michael, so she decided to just drive him crazy and take away the business. In a few days, the divorce. She will be a free woman again and will find an even more worthy groom than the previous one. After all, she already has someone in mind. Michael realized that Adriana was just mocking him and had lied. The man did not know how to outwit the psychopath. In his head, there was only one idea: to hire a private detective who would follow her and report everything to him, despite the fact that spending the last money on such a specialist did not want to. There was no way out. So the man took a risk and dialed the number of a private investigator. At that time, Alfred returned to Russia from another country to save their joint business with Michael. On arrival, the young man set about launching an advertisement. He presented everything as if Michael was suspended from work. And the main thing here, that there was no bad name behind the company. He hoped that after the advertising was launched, the building materials could be sold in the same volume as before. The day of the divorce came. Adriana and Michael couple divorced quickly and without many questions. Coming out of the registry office, Adriana looked at her ex-husband, smiled venomously, and said, "You know, I did so much for you. I saved you from prison, and you immediately wanted to give me up. You were never worthy of my love." Michael decided not to say anything. After all, he was waiting for the results of the private detective's work and hoped to put the psychopath in jail for a long time. Suddenly, Adriana turned around and walked off in the other direction. After his ex-wife left, Michael stood in the driveway and hesitated whether or not to call Betty. If this stubborn woman could get to the truth and save all the kidnapped. After all, she has already once been able to unearth the truth about him, which means that she will be able to bring Adriana out into the open. At this time, Michael's ex-wife has already arrived at the garage near the forest and wanted to go inside, as suddenly found that she was followed by a clumsy old man. The elderly man pretended that the neighboring garage belonged to him. Or it didn't get funny, because this is where all the garages of hers are. She had bought the whole garage cooperative years ago. Adriana pretended to feel sick, then suddenly collapsed to the ground, feigning an epileptic seizure. The private investigator was frightened and ran up to the shaking woman. Adriana continued to play the role of the sick stranger and in a trembling voice stated, "See, there's a black Jeep. Inside it are my epilepsy pills. The door to the car is open. Just find my bag. But hurry up, please." The man only had time to turn around before he suddenly felt a severe pain in his head and fell to the ground, immediately losing consciousness. Behind his body stood Adriana, who threw the bloody stone out of his hands and shivered. Suddenly, the woman interrupted the silence and answered herself. "A private detective, I guess." "Yes, Michael. You really don't have much money left." Adriana dragged the poor old man to the other girls in the basement and also said with a chain. When the kidnapped ladies saw the elderly man with a bloody head, they started yelling and screaming. Adriana got tired of listening to their screams and sharply reprimanded "Shut up, already alive. Stop yelling. Today you have a celebration. It looks like Anna is going free." All the girls in the room looked at each other in surprise and fell silent. After a minute, Anna decided to break the silence and asked Adriana the following: "What do I have to do?" "I hope you won't kill me." Adriana waved her hand and replied, "I am not going to kill you. I have a business proposition for you. I have studied the biographies of all the girls, and you are the smartest among them. So I am sure that you will make the right choice and not let me down." Finished talking, and Adriana approached Anna and silently took off her chains. Then they went upstairs together. A few hours after the divorce, the man was already at the bar and drank an entire bottle of whiskey. It was only after the alcohol that he felt brave and decided it was time to call Betty. He needed her help. At first, Betty sent Michael as soon as she heard his voice in the phone and blocked all his incoming numbers. But half an hour later, the girl received a text from him with the following content. "I know I look like a stalker right now, but think to yourself. We can meet in a public place and talk calmly. It wouldn't be profitable for me to kidnap women. What about hurting you? You see the way I'm gargled on every show. I want to talk to you because I finally figure out who's been kidnapping my exes. It wasn't me. Yeah, I liked strangling ladies, but not kidnapping. Believe me, I know you are the only one who can bring this thing to light." Betty was very surprised by the message she received. There was something genuine in Michael's words, and the text itself was desperate. However, her heart desperately did not want to believe him. In her head, the following text was spinning: "Just delete the message and forget about it like a bad dream. After all, you already got the money and cured your neck." While Betty was thinking about whether or not to help her former employer, a breaking newscast began on the television. The correspondent told the following. Anna found the girl decided to put an end to the story of the maniacal businessman. She stated that Michael Salisbury kidnapped her like the others. But one day he felt bad, and she managed to escape. Her parents still can't believe their daughter managed to wrestle the keys from the maniac's hands to run out into the street and go to the police. Betty was shocked at the news. After all, just now, the man had been calling and texting her. Is he really stupid enough to reach out to his former victims on the day one of the abductees escaped, or is someone skillfully setting him up? But why would the secretary lie? It was obvious that the girl, all their Udally, was a captive. After a short thought, Betty decided to meet Anna and then to visit Michael in prison. After all, now he really faces a big sentence, and no amount of money will not save him. At first, Betty couldn't get a hold of Anna. She knew her cell phone number and her work number because she sometimes came to work with Michael. Also, the receptionist would sometimes call from her cell phone herself and relay cooking-cleaning errands. Surprisingly, when Betty called the work phone, she didn't pick up the phone. The secretary was reluctant to say anything at first, but then told Betty a little pity story. And a story was full of inconsistencies, and it was unclear how the man had managed to keep a huge number of women on chains at the cottage, and how he had managed to move them all to another place. Immediately after Anna's escape, Betty began to suspect that the secretary was lying. But why was she doing it? It remained to be seen. In order to find out the full picture of what had happened, the girl decided to call Michael, but his phone was out of range. So Betty changed her clothes and called a cab directly to the police station. When she arrived, the girl found out from the investigator that Michael is now under interrogation, and then he will be placed in a detention center. If Betty paid a little, they would be allowed to talk even before being transported to another department. The former maid was not greedy, so she agreed. After the man came out of interrogation, they were allowed to be alone in one of the department's rooms. I'll make the conversation clear right away. I'm not going to save you. I don't feel sorry for you either. But it's obvious that your secretary Anna is lying. Why would she do that? That's the question. I'm starting to doubt that you've been kidnapping girls. But then who are you to say I'm the only one who can bring this thing to light? Michael looked insanely tired. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and sighed disappointedly, and then answered, "It's my wife, or rather ex-wife." "Well, have you met her?" "She herself came to me before the divorce and said that this secret should restore our relationship and take it to the next level. Compared my strangulation to the kidnappings, said we had to reveal our secrets. I was hungover, feeling terrible. She shocked me with her revelation. All I could do was call the police, but she gave me the wrong address. I realize now that I was in a hurry, and it was all just a test. Adriana couldn't see if I could be trusted. Now she's taking revenge and trying to make me look like a maniac and a lunatic." Betty hesitated a little at Michael's words and looked intently into the man's eyes. It was easy to see the despair and sadness in them. Inside, the girl had a strong feeling that this time Michael could be trusted, so she said, "And how can you prove all these words? Can't you at least have cameras with a sound recorder?" Michael shook his head and whispered, "I've said the same thing several times already. I tell the cops first, and now you don't have any cameras. Otherwise, how would I be able to make love to you in the morning? She'd be watching me all the time. It wouldn't be a marriage, it would be a nightmare." The man paused briefly and then continued, "Only you can find proof that she's behind the kidnappings. You'll have to dig into her past. And then I'm sure we can find some leads with you. I told the coroner I hired a private investigator to follow her. And he disappeared too. But he laughed at me and told me I was just getting screwed out of money. That's a clue too. What happened to the nice old man I paid off? It would be very easy to canvass his acquaintances and find out if he was missing." Betty looked at Michael perplexed and said, "Why should I help you?" The man shrugged his shoulders and replied, "Well, you came here, so you care about these women. You've already stood up not only for yourself, but for others once. You can do that not for me, but for them." Betty smiled and said thoughtfully, "That's manipulation on your part, of course. But you're partly right, the girls need help. I'll check into Adriana's background, but a little later. And by the way, before I go, answer me one question." The man was pleased that Betty had agreed to help, but tried not to show it. After a brief silence, the man asked what the question was. Betty made a serious look on her face and continued, "Why didn't she kidnap me? Why did she lock everyone in a back room somewhere, but not me? Why would she tell me about your exes?" The man laughed and said, "Well, it's simple. She thought the affair was all my fault. She was sick, and I hired a maid and slept with her. The others were all over me, but not you. Yes, no doubt you annoy her, but you haven't crossed her yet." After the last words, the girl decided to end her conversation with Michael and left the room. She still had to dig into Adriana's past and find out if the private investigator Michael had hired was missing. Thankfully, the man had given her the keys to his house. When they talked to the police and find out who the private investigator was, it was not difficult, nor was it difficult to determine Adriana's past last name. At this time, Adriana decided to set up her personal life. Her ex-husband was over and she was lonely. Therefore, Adriana began to act decisively. She met with a co-worker of Michael named Alfred and complained about the fact that she had wasted most of her life on a maniac. She also tried to console the man because his best friend turned out to be a psychopath. Alfred immediately believed Adriana because they had communicated before, and he always thought that Michael did not appreciate her, and Adriana was a beauty. She had 2 higher educations and was an excellent cook. What more did he need? Alfred thought. The answer lay on the surface. After all, it turned out that Michael was a maniac. Logically, Such a woman would not be appreciated only by a psycho. And Adriana realized that Alfred would fall for her pretty quickly and was already counting on a new marriage. It remained only to think of a way to seduce a man, because in her house very much lacked male hands. So the girl said goodbye to Alfred, called a cab to the shopping center, and went shopping. What better than a beautiful dress and perfume can emphasize a woman's sexuality? That's right, nothing. Betty at that moment ran into Michael's house and took his laptop. As soon as the young maid put the device in her bag, she left the man's mansion and started hailing a cab. After arriving at her hometown courtyard and reaching her apartment, Betty felt her legs buzzing with fatigue and moaned in pain, a little from lying on the bed. The girl turned on her former employer's laptop and began searching for the information she needed. Michael's deal with the private investigator Betty found quite quickly through the browser history. Also, the girl immediately studied all the background of the detective with the help of a program that a friend from the computer club had installed for her. A private investigator named Rick never set up any of his clients. If he took on any case, he did not back down to the last. That surprised Vetu, so she ran him through search engines and social media. It turned out that Holland had indeed gone missing a couple days ago, and relatives were very concerned that the man wasn't in touch and his phone was disconnected. After Betty found out about Rick's disappearance, she managed to squeeze out only a few phrases. Yeah, I don't have a lot of options. Either Michael and Adriana are a couple of maniacs conspiring to drive me crazy, or Michael kidnapped that detective and killed him, and then started telling me stories. Of course, there is a third option, which I don't want to believe, that his wife is really doing all this. But why? Next, the girl had to find out Adriana's past, and it had to start with her last name. After 3 hours of searching, Betty found nothing and dozed off. And then came the next day. Betty had nightmares in her dream all night. Michael and Adriana turned out to be cannibals who were trying to eat the poor maid who didn't have time to make them lunch. After the girl opened her eyes, she first breathed a sigh of relief and then laughed. However, the search had to continue. There was no telling what else she would dream about this week. Betty decided to change the direction of the search and looked into the background of Adriana's parents. She finally found the last name of her ex-wife, Michael. Adriana used to go by the last name Babkina. At first, knowing the suspect's last name didn't help her. But suddenly, the maid had the idea to check her data with a broomstick, and it was the right decision. Later, it turned out that Adriana in the past regularly visited one medical institution. Mostly psychologists, psychiatrists, and neurologists worked there. Betty made the assumption that Adriana had seen a psychiatrist, which meant that the only thing left to do was to visit her primary care physician and find evidence of Michael's ex-wife's guilt. Betty felt that she was close to solving the mystery, especially when she was already standing on the threshold of the clinic. Gathering her courage, the girl went inside. Betty then asked the receptionist to call all the psychiatrists at the clinic. Allegedly, she was having a seizure and was on the verge of suicide. All the available doctors at the clinic came running to the screams of the crazy client. Betty went a little overboard in her portrayal of a psychopath. At first, she was talking nonsense, but at the end she added that she would only be treated by the doctor who had saved her friend Adriana. One thin and tall brown eyes, and the psychiatrist waved his hand, and then said, "Well, then stop yelling. You found someone who will save you, and so has Adriana." Betty was glad she had gotten her way and responded well. "And we can start the reception already." The man nodded and led her to his office. When they entered the small room and the door closed, Betty panicked. After all, she had a meager imagination, and the psychiatrist was clearly expecting a story from her. The girl remembered the latest movies about psychopaths and began to retell the plot from the movie. The doctor did not notice it and began to participate in the conversation. At the end of the appointment, the girl asked if the psychiatrist had lied to her. The man replied sternly that he never lies. Betty realized that the man would not tell her directly about Adriana's affliction. so it was necessary to keep him busy with something for a few minutes to look for her card in the office. The girl lied that she was allergic to the dust in the room and asked for an urgent search. The psychiatrist was scared for the patient's health and retreated to the front desk for medication. At this point, Betty started checking all the lockers and found a file on Adriana. Quickly stashing it in her bag, the girl sat down in her former seat and tried to hide her joy as best she could. When the doctor came back and gave her a pill, she defiantly drank it and went out into the common room. Then Betty quickly paid for the appointment by card at the reception desk, went down the stairs to the street, called a cab, and went home. When she arrived at the address and entered her apartment, she immediately threw off her outerwear, sat on the bed, took out Adriana's file, and started reading. Betty felt like a real detective. The girl felt as if she was starring in a cool movie. But her positive emotions were replaced by horror when she got to the information about Adriana's diagnosis. The girl's dossier said that she suffers from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and split personality. The most amazing thing was that all of these diagnoses had been checked and confirmed by an entire panel of doctors. She had seen about 5 psychiatrists prior to meeting Michael, and no one had been able to help her. On several occasions, doctors had noted that she refused to take her pills and was having terrible breakdowns. After reading the last lines in Betty's file, smirked and said, "Yes, you and Michael are worth each other. But I guess he didn't lie to me. Adriana is indeed behind the kidnappings of the other women. But how do I prove it? We're gonna have to follow her. There's a good chance it could end badly for me. Maybe I should just drop the whole thing and move far away to visit my parents, for example." The girl continued to think out loud. After a little rest and thinking, Betty decided to visit Michael one last time. The girl was sure that it was this man who should motivate her to continue the investigation. Or would she just leave town and forget about Adriana's dossier? At this time, the psychiatrist wanted to re-examine Adriana's file, as he was determined to understand why her friend had come to him. After all, he was the one who couldn't help Adriana. Neither could the other doctors. When he discovered the file was missing, the man immediately called his former patient to report the theft. "Hello, Adriana. A crazy woman showed up today claiming to be your friend. After the appointment, she stole your chart with your diagnosis. I realize we have to maintain confidentiality, but please don't sue us. Here's her last name, first name, middle name Betty." Adriana sighed irritably and replied, "Don't worry, Sam, it's true. My friend, just in addition to her neurosis, she's also suffering from Anna's clip. I'll take care of it myself. Thanks for letting me know." After that, the angry girl hung up the phone and started looking for her kidnap case. And after collecting the suitcase, Adriana called a lawyer and asked him to draw up some papers. An hour later, Adriana was already standing outside her garage. Park the car. She went inside and went down to the basement. The kidnapped girls, as well as the detective, lay in utter exhaustion on the floor. Seeing the disappointing picture, the girl laughed and said, "Shit, I forgot to feed you. But at least you have a private toilet, shower, and sink. I think you have been given the best accommodations." Suddenly, Adriana was silent for a moment and then continued, "Do you want to get out of here today?" All the girls nodded, but the man only managed to raise his hand a little. And Adriana grinned and began to talk about her offer. But who would have doubted that everyone would agree? "You must sign the papers I will give you on these papers. You have participated in a social experiment voluntarily. The essence of the experiment is that experts conclude in the course of work how long people can live in the basement on chains and how it affects their health, both physical and psychological. Of course, you will be paid for this." After all, the experiment was voluntary, wasn't it, my dears? Everyone said yes. Adriana laughed again and remarked, "Your voices should be more joyful. Today you will go free." The teacher went around the room and held out pens to everyone. And then the contracts. When everyone had signed the contract, Adriana began to remove the chains from the girls and then got to the detective as well. Two exhausted beauties under the hand of the private detective headed for the exit at once. But Christina did not want to leave and asked Galina, "I don't believe in your kindness. You're just going to let everyone go. Is this contract really that good for your rights?" Adriana raised her head proudly and replied, "Christina, are you really that stupid? Run away while you have the chance. Or do I need to renew your contract?" The teacher suddenly smiled predatorily. Christina looked at Adriana incredulously and threw a few last phrases, "And I'm already leaving. But my heart tells me that there's something fishy going on here. There's a reason why you were so quick to get rid of us." Adriana laughed again and said, "Do you want me to spare you a thought? I just found a new man. No more mistresses, only decent husbands." After the teacher laughed, Christina did not listen to her anymore and quickly went up the stairs to the exit. The next day came. Betty woke up in a great mood. After all, she had found out the truth, and now she would be able to save the girls, even if Michael didn't convince her to help him. She could always leave an anonymous message for the police. However, the girl decided not to watch TV today for nothing. After all, the television told what happened to the missing ladies. It turned out that they took part in a secret social experiment, and one of them is now fabulously rich. The same Christina is a student, moonlighting in the excursion, and became a millionaire. The whole point is that she took part in the experiment the longest. The others were only there for a couple of months, and she more than 5 years. The experiment was conducted by Rubicon, a company not registered not to Adriana, but to a certain Jack. After Betty dressed the bruised, born, she stuffed the phones, the dossier into her purse, and then headed for the police. She was once again lucky and was able to make an appointment with Michael at the department. When Betty and Michael were left alone together, a very amusing dialogue began. The first to speak was the girl. "Your ex-wife is really crazy. And it's well documented. I found her file. And you were right about the detective being missing. I don't know if I should pursue this case any further. I'm starting to realize that Adriana is a real danger to society. But if you pay me, I'll help you." The man laughed and replied, "Betty, haven't you seen the news? I'm in prison and I know what's going on." She released all the girls and the detectives too. He contacted me right after the escape, and Adriana made them all sign an agreement that they were in a social experiment. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't prove anything. She's got a rich family, and she makes good money selling real estate. And I'm about to be released too. Christina, my lawyer, accused me of slander. The girl claimed I was the one who kidnapped everyone. I'll be released in a couple days, and my father will give me my money back. But I'm not spending my blood money to get back at that crazy woman. I've had enough of her. I hope I can get my business back. But even if I get my business back now, I'll have to go to psychiatrists periodically for a long time because of the abuse allegations." Betty was stunned, and after a couple minutes she replied, "What am I supposed to do now? Forget about your crazy girlfriend. You should have thought about that a long time ago. Suddenly, you'll be normal." Having finished her speech, the girl grinned. From the recent events, Michael really changed inside and realized that he no longer wanted to show aggression. The man decided to make a fresh start after the clinic and prison. When he was accused of kidnapping, only Betty believed him. That's why he started to have feelings for her. Surprisingly, even the parents were sure that their son was a maniac, but not the former maid. Confessing his feelings, Michael was afraid, especially now, but he decided to take the hint. The man gently stroked the hand of Betty, who was sitting across from him, and replied, "Yes, I think you should leave Adriana alone. She's a psychopath, and probably has a narcissistic physical personality disorder. Take care of yourself and stay away from her. Maybe you should even go on vacation. I hope she doesn't find out you stole her file. Otherwise, Adriana won't just let you go." Michael paused for a moment and continued, "And if you need a friend or a man, you can always come to me. I'm grateful for your help, and I'll wire you as much money as you need as soon as I get out. Thank you." Betty. She was surprised to hear Michael's words, but she didn't show it. And noticing that the man grabbed her hand, the former maid freaked out a little and moved away from her former employer. After a moment, the girl calmly answered Michael, "Yes, you are right. It's better to leave the elite in the past. And about you, I don't think a relationship with you is a good idea. Sorry." Betty finished her speech, gathered herself, and silently left the office, and Michael felt his heart shattering into hundreds of pieces. But he realized that it was deserved, and there was no point in stopping the girl. Already leaving the office, Betty felt her heart beating frantically. For some reason, she was drawn to go back, but she overpowered herself. The man was still attractive to her, but after everything she had been through, she couldn't trust him. Certainly not after the abuse. She didn't see herself as a victim, and she didn't want to get caught up in the Carmona triangle. And anyway, she was doing all this for the money, wasn't she? Walking out of the police station, the girl felt defeated, so she looked at her phone and explored the neighborhood. There was a cafe nearby. She decided to head there. It's about time to get drunk, Betty thought. After walking through the dense park, she was only a couple of meters away from the unfortunate cafe. Her legs were already tired. Betty mentally berated herself for not calling a cab. It was pretty dark outside, and the girl thought for a second that a shadow had slipped past. She reassured herself that she was tired, and it was only the branches of trees flickering before her eyes. Suddenly, she heard a crunch and felt a wild pain in her head, and then a fog. Behind Betty's body stood Adriana with a cobblestone, who was muttering to herself, "I'm so sick of you, stupid maid. I should have put you on a chain right away." A few hours later, Betty woke up in the basement. Her head was groomed, and an anti-sanctions band-aid was visible on her hair. Turning around was hard, and the girl began to realize that she had been jammed with some sort of hard object, perhaps a cobblestone, and then dragged here. After some thought, the maid realized that Adriana was probably behind it. Betty even felt like laughing at the silliness of the situation. Just when she had decided to drop the investigation, Michael's ex-wife had decided to silence her. Reflection. The girls were interrupted by a mouthpiece or some sort of speaker limited to the wall, which was hard to notice at once. From the device came a woman's voice. "But hello, beautiful. You're awake at last. I had to sit with you for hours. But tell me, why did you mind your own business? You could have lived happily ever after. And after the strangling incident, vacationing on an island somewhere. But no, you had to steal my file. If I let the others go, I'd have to kill you. I was forbidden since childhood to reveal my real name or I'd be disinherited. And you're stupid. Stupid. Do you think I want to kill you? No, but you leave me no choice." Betty found it hard to think and speak, but she tried to answer. "Kill for the last name, but you're definitely schizophrenic. I don't give a shit about you and your family. I'm sick of you. I wanted to release the girls, and that's it. But you let them go. I was the last to know, and I was gonna drop the case. But no, you had to silence me." Adriana went into a frenzy. No one had ever called her sick. No one knew about her diagnosis, and now she wanted revenge. But time was short. "I'll deal with you later. Leave you for my sheepdogs to feed." "Oh, you didn't know I had dogs. They've been all over the place lately. I think you'd make a great steak." After that, the girl turned off all her devices and went to seduce her new fiancé. Alfred won't be waiting long. After all, there are plenty of single women who want him. Betty was cold and scared, especially after the words about the steak. She remembered her nightmare about Adriana and Michael being cannibals, and she felt uneasy at the mere thought that the dream would come true. At this time, Adriana was asking Alfred to evaluate all of her new outfits: a black, short and ruching dress with a power cutout, as well as a purple one with a slit up the leg. Well, the last variant of the updated closet also demanded the evaluation of a transparent dress made of a special film. The man laughed when he saw the third dress. Yes, he was certainly crazy about Adriana and her looks, but modern fashion scared him. The girl was standing in front of him in almost nothing but lingerie. And of course he wouldn't want her to wear that. What if she wore it to a party? Then she'd have a lot of suitors. Alfred advised me to keep only the first dress, as it fit her perfectly. When the girl smiled sadly and pouted her lips naively, the businessman could not stand it and ran up to his seductive. He then grabbed Adriana and pulled her to him, starting to kiss her lips greedily. A few days after the Passion Night, Alfred and Adriana Michael were released from jail. He felt great, free at last. Now it was possible to drink cognac at any time of the day or night, and to socialize again only with the people with whom one wanted to. Speaking of people, Michael missed his former maid very much, so he picked up the phone and called Betty, but the answer was only a dial tone. After Michael got home, the first thing he did was shower and eat, and then sat on the bed. There was no way the man could stop thinking about Betty. He just wanted to hear her voice or her laughter. So he dialed her number again. But this time the phone was already off. Michael was confused by the fact that the girl was ignoring him again. After all, they had agreed that after prison he would give her the money. So the man continued to call Betty without ceasing. And then the businessman decided to come to visit her. And the man found out the address quickly. It was not difficult for him to run the data about the maid through the service agency. Having received the desired address, the man called a cab and arrived at the place. Then he got out of the car, entered the entrance, and went up to the 4th floor. After knocking on Betty's door several times and seeing no response, Michael became frustrated and decided to leave. Just as the man began to descend the stairs, a neighbor came out and beckoned him over. The elderly woman stated that Betty had not been home for 4 days, and it was scaring her. Gino and Betty were not just neighbors, but one might even say friends. Betty visited her grandmother regularly, bringing her groceries and scrubbing her floors. The women bonded over their hatred of other neighbors who were getting drunk and debauched in the entryway. After communicating with his neighbor, Betty man was scared out of his wits. He was tormented by thoughts that the girl was kidnapped by Adriana. But Michael did not know what to do in this case, especially since recently in the police department he himself offered the girl to leave everything in this city and go away to rest. Michael made a decision. If Betty doesn't respond to his last text message, tomorrow he will run her number through military acquaintances and find out where her smartphone is. Waking up in the morning, the man wrote the following text to his favorite girl's number. "Hello, dear Betty. I am guilty of many things to you and will not impose on you again. Just say it's all right. That will be enough for me." In a minute, Michael's cell phone received a reply message, "Everything's okay, dear." The man looked at the smartphone screen in surprise. Betty, she never called him that. It wasn't her style. She liked to use a diminutive nickname. Adriana, on the other hand, just loved the word darling. Despite the promises he'd made to himself, yesterday Michael realized he wouldn't rest until he ran the maid's number. In the meantime, Adriana was snickering with the phone in her hands. Suddenly, she stopped briefly and moved closer to Betty, who was sleeping sweetly in the arms of the battery. The teacher gave her victim a little shake and asked, "And you always take so long to sleep? I have some news for you here." Betty opened her eyes wide and stared at Adriana. A moment later, coming to her senses, she asked, "What is it?" Adriana smiled predatorily and quoted her ex-husband's message, and then switched to Betty. "But what do you think of the message? My husband seems to have a crush on you." "Oh, ex-husband. Although who are we kidding? Status never stopped you. You know what the funny thing is?" Betty sighed and asked irritably, "And what's that?" Adriana rolled her eyes in response and said the following, "Well, the funny thing is that he'll be calling and sending smiley faces to the corpse, or the piece of meat that will be lying in my dog's kennel. And I'll be telling him about endless love in the Bahamas, like I love him. I mean you, but I can't go back to him. There are only beautiful, tanned men around." Betty twirled the finger of his free hand at his temple and asked Adriana, "Maybe you should continue your treatment. I'm just a little sick of you." The girl was hungry and tired, so she continued to speak negatively. She started screaming, "Let me go, you sick psychopath. I do not need your ex-husband and the new one. I don't care about anyone." And Adriana again felt a surge of anger and with all her might hit Betty in the face with the phone. She blacked out again, and the teacher said out loud, "Well, there you go passing out again." A few hours later, Michael's acquaintances from the military unit were able to trace the girl's number and called the businessman. They informed him that the phone was last online in the area of One Forest. There is another well-known garage cooperative there. The man decided to clarify who owns the cooperative, and when they told him that or not, everything fell into place. Michael decided not to call the police, but to go straight to Betty and save him and save her. He didn't trust anyone, especially after the incident with the charges in jail. Everyone but Betty had given up on him, so it was impossible to abandon her. Preparing his gun and knife, the man felt more confident and called a cab for the garage cooperative. Arriving at the place, Michael was horrified at the territory was about 10 garages, and outside it was gradually starting to get dark. Should I knock on every garage, or is it better to start shouting? Would it help? Michael pondered aloud. After 5 minutes, however, the man decided to try both methods in practice. Betty was lying unconscious on the basement floor. Suddenly, she heard a creepy man's screams through her sleep. The girl thought to herself, "What a nasty voice." Forgetting that she was not at home, the girl tried to get up and yelled back before opening her eyes. What the hell for? Suddenly regaining consciousness from her own screaming, the girl realized that the man screaming outside was Michael, and he was looking for her. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach the man, Betty realized it was ineffective. It is likely that isolation has been carried out here, the girl thought to herself. There was a small battery and a toilet near Betty, so she had an interesting idea to use a chain to disintegrate the technical devices. Yes, it was a risky idea, but she had no choice. Betty hoped that Michael would hear the sound of water, or at least notice the puddle by the garage. Betty began to pound her chain with all her might, first on the radiator and then on the toilet, and she succeeded in getting her sanction. Cracks started to form, and Michael heard a noise. When Michael determined where the water would be, he admired the girl's ingenuity, but it was necessary to act decisively. Therefore, the man left sentimentality for later. He accelerated and tried to kick the door with his foot, but he failed. So Michael brought his gun to bear and punched the lock with it. And then he ran inside. But it turns out that getting inside is not the hardest part. There's still the basement to find. The man searched the place several times, but to no avail. He was about to call the police, but to dirty his hand with something sticky. So he went into the bathroom and noticed a strange faucet, which did not turn on and stood crooked. Michael hit it sharply. Suddenly, a secret room opened up. He went down the stairs to the basement and saw the wet tube jumping from behind the boiling water. Michael quickly oriented himself. First, he found the keys to the chain, then connected it from the girl's hand, and then dragged Vetu towards the exit. Once out in the open, the happy couple ran toward the road. When Michael caught a cab, he immediately took Betty to his house to protect her from Adriana's paw. At this time, Alfred rewrote Serioja's company to Adriana, and after signing the contract, the businessman looked tenderly into her eyes and said, "Will you marry me?" And Adriana answered the man without hesitation, "Yes, my love." "Well, wait a minute. I want to check something on my phone." The businessman nodded and said the following words, before retreating to the kitchen. "Okay, I'm very happy. My baby girl that you agree. I'm going to go. I'll pour us each a glass of champagne. Soon a new life awaits us without the old mistakes." Adriana smiled and waited until the man stepped away, and then turned on the video surveillance system on her smartphone. Seeing that the basement had flooded and the girl wasn't inside, we teacher couldn't help herself and sagged out loud. Alfred heard the mat from the lips of his beloved and jumped up to her with champagne. Holding out one line glasses, the man asked, "What's wrong?" "Sweetheart." Adriana realized the need to lie and said, "Yes, the ex-husband is annoying. Still won't leave me alone. Well, you know him. Michael calls me every once in a while, and it's getting really annoying. You can help me deal with him." Alfred blushed with anger and replied, "Let's go. I'll beat him up." Adriana smiled enigmatically and threw back at him, "Let's go." Michael fed Betty some fruit and gave her his clothes from the closet. The girl went and changed her clothes and told Michael about the assault, and at the end of the story emphasized that she needed to go to the police today and file a report on Adriana. The former maid was convinced that it was time to end things with Adriana. If she didn't go to jail now, she was bound to kill someone. Michael, not thinking long enough, agreed. And just as the couple threw on their outerwear and hailed a cab, suddenly the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, the man sighed disappointedly and said out loud the following text: "Yes, we're here now, it seems, and ideas are hiding and call the police. And I'll deal with our guests. Tired of running from my ex-wife and her accomplices already. She may know how to piss on women, but she can't beat me in a fight." As Betty hid in the closet and called the police department, Michael suddenly opened the door and a loud rumble was heard. Apparently, someone had fallen and broken the dishes. Unfortunately, it was Michael who fell. Alfred knew where to hit, so he immediately aimed for the nose to get revenge on his fiancée's ex-husband. After the man who opened the door fell down, Alfred declared, "One more time you touch my sweetheart, and I will unscrew your head. She told me how you beat and strangled her. You're a maniac. You're not my friend anymore." Michael stood up, got ice from the refrigerator, and put it on his nose. When the bleeding stopped, Michael threw the ice away. He walked right up to his former friend, suddenly grabbed him by the head, and started slamming him against the wall. The elaborate brawl continued for about half an hour, and the police never arrived. Adriana was the first one who couldn't take it anymore. She pulled out a knife and told Michael to stop. But as soon as he stopped, Alfred got back into the fight. Then Betty couldn't stand it any longer and ran out into the corridor shouting, "Stop. Alfred, I may not know you, but you trusted the wrong woman. She's a maniac, and I have real proof." The men stopped fighting and stared at Vechu, and Adriana was about to stab the girl. And Adriana clenched her fists and then ran forward and swung at Vechu. But suddenly there was the sound of a gunshot. When Michael and Betty came home, the man handed her his gun so that she could always stand up for herself and no longer be afraid of Adriana. But no one knew that the girl would use it already today. When Betty saw the point of the knife, she reflexively pulled out the gun and fired. Everyone called an ambulance, but Adriana was beyond saving. The girl died from a direct shot in the stomach. Of course, together with the ambulance came the police. At first, Vetu, together with two angry men, were taken to the department, but then the girl was released. It was self-defense. Even Alfred confirmed the words of the former maid, although to the point of madness he wanted to avenge her for the death of the woman he loved. Betty was also acquitted in court. She provided not only video footage from Adriana's CCTV camera, but also data about her mental health condition. When Alfred learned the truth about his lover, he stopped hating Michael and Betty, and then even thanked them for saving his own life. Michael failed to win back his company from Alfred and Adriana's father, but the man opened a new company. Now the successful businessman sold not building materials, but medicines. Medicines began to bring much more income than the sale of building materials. After the incident, Michael and Betty became very close. They wanted to start a family and decided never to remember the past again, and especially Michael's outbursts of rage and Adriana's death. Michael became about husband cleaning and cooking, and in the house he decided to do his own chores. And Betty forgot flirting with strange men and finally realized her long-held dream. She married a rich businessman. 3 years later, The happy couple had a long-awaited baby boy. They named the boy Joy. The couple decided to bring up the boy strictly, so they tried not to spoil him with luxurious gifts and taught him to appreciate money. Betty revised her views on life after the birth of the child. She realized that never and under no circumstances should not get involved with a married man, even if it seems that the young man is ideal by all parameters. Behind his beautiful facade can hide a lot of unpleasant things. No one can tell you how many skeletons a couple has in their closet and what will happen to your life if you get involved in someone else's marriage. Betty may have gotten her way, but at what cost? Fights, kidnappings, murders. Not every girl would want to go through that to start a family with a rich businessman and have a child. And is the money worth the agony? Probably not. Betty married Michael not because of his financial status, but because the man saved her from his wife Adriana's monster and then showed her what caring and love are. You should only fight for a relationship if there are feelings there, and if there aren't, it's best to back off. It is likely that the married suitor already has a crazy Adriana of his own.